Here's good. Yeah.
All set? Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, my name is Bill Todd, and I'm the candidate for mayor here in Columbus, Ohio. And we're here today right hard on the heels of a breaking announcement from the Department of Homeland Security. As you probably know, every year the Department of Homeland Security issues grants to assist local communities, state and local government, in preparedness for national security matters, particularly counterterrorism, and for engaging in high-level efforts in law enforcement in the local community. In fact, since 9/11/2001, the Department of Homeland Security has issued over $18 billion in total grants to assist first responders, both fire and police, in doing their responsibilities in the local level. Today, we had the most recent set of announcements of grants for the 2007 grant cycle. Those grants reflected grants to 45 American metropolitan areas. Despite the fact that the city of Columbus is the 15th largest city in the country and is ranked in the top 20 in terms of risk factors of a potential terrorist attack in the United States, I'm here, unfortunately, to tell you that we landed 40th out of 45 cities in the number of dollars that were awarded in grants. Now, let's not talk about in terms of a strict comparison from city to city, but the reality is Columbus was not prepared in making its grant application this year, even though the materials were issued by the Department of Homeland Security last December, and there was more than adequate opportunity for officials of the Coleman administration to put in a good case for an adequate amount of dollars for the city of Columbus. Now, what can those grants be used for? They can be used for vehicles, they can be used for new police cruisers, for new fire trucks, for additional training for our men and women who serve in our public safety forces. Shortchanging the city of Columbus is the fault of only one group, and that group is Michael Coleman and his administration, and their failure to understand and to adequately participate in what is a competitive grant-making process run by the Department of Homeland Security. Let me give you an illustration of just how badly Columbus did in this little competition. Despite the fact that we're a much higher risk category city than cities like Providence, Rhode Island, and Oklahoma City, both of which are vastly smaller cities and have far less risk. We received less than half the amount of money cities like that received in this latest round of grants issued today. And indeed, Tampa, Indianapolis, Portland, Oregon all received more than twice the amount of money that the city of Columbus received in this recent allocation of grants. Well, what should that tell us? That should tell us that we have an administration that's asleep at the switch. Despite promises of fighting crime and being prepared for terrorism, we simply don't have people who are executing their responsibilities in a way to ensure that we get our full fair share of the grants. Let me go back a little bit and tell you about the mayor's attitude about crime and terrorism. 3 years ago, he told the city of Columbus that the reality was that crime and terrorism were at the top of his agenda, and we'll do anything necessary to keep our city safe from terrorism and crime. The reality is that since that time, Columbus is one of the few places in the United States where there's been a demonstrated terrorist cell, and we've had high-level terrorists indicted and shortly to go on trial for terror activities. That is not keeping the city safe. It is not keeping the city free from terrorism. Is there attention to detail and adequate attention to detail from the administration on these matters? I suggest that the answer is no. In his last 3 State of the City addresses, Mayor Coleman addressed 157 total words out of over 16,000 words to the topics of Homeland Security and terrorism, reflecting a very low interest, a very low level of priority, and unfortunately, leading to such developments as today, where we wind up at the bottom of the pile when it comes time to allocate federal dollars for this necessary function of protecting us and protecting the people of the city of Columbus. This lack of planning in the Homeland Security area, in the defense against terrorism, and again, defense against those types of violent crimes is also reflected in the lack of attention by the administration to the impending crisis that we're going to see in police staffing levels. The city has not done an adequate job to ensure that the graying of our police force is going to be met with a number of recruits that will put enough police on the streets throughout the city of Columbus to make sure every single resident feels safe in his or her home in this city. It's a matter that should have been taken care of by careful planning, by attention to detail. The devil is in the details in this area, as it is in so many areas of city administration. You need to keep the eye on the ball and make sure that you're planning for the future. That simply has not been happening with this administration. And that's why Chief Jackson, all the way from Chief Jackson to the top of the administration down to the patrolman on the street, will tell you that we're going to be 400 to 500 police short in this city in the next several years, and we need to develop a plan to address that shortfall. A plan that probably should have been in place at least 4 years ago. Photo ops with new police recruits are simply not going to be the way to get this job done, Mayor. What you need to do is spend some time, roll up your sleeves, and make sure we've got enough police on the streets. And while we're at it, let's make sure we have a diverse police force. In a city where we have an African-American chief of police and an African-American safety director, it is not acceptable that we only have 3 out of 59 new recruits who are African Americans. We need to do a better job of recruiting a diverse police force. We need more women in the police force. We need more minorities, African American. We need to have Hispanic speakers. We need to be prepared for the evolving demands of what is ever more diverse community. And we simply aren't there today. Bottom line in all this, you can't simply go out and run with the police recruits. You got to spend some time and work on a plan. You got to be prepared. Just like in the matter of Homeland Security, in the matter of staffing in the police department, you need to be prepared. You have to think about the future. We have to strategically plan what the safety needs are going to be for the community in the future. One last note, and I think it's one that I think is instructive of this whole thing, a lack of planning by the city administration. It is very frightening to me to think that for a police officer stationed on Polaris Parkway in southern Delaware County, they need to report at a police station at Morrison Carl Road, which is the substation that covers that precinct. Why is that important? That reflects a lack of attention to detail, a lack of planning, a lack of effectively deploying the forces we do have in circumstances and in places where they can be effectively used to meet the needs in the community. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions from those of you in attendance today. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Todd, I hear what you're saying, and you're suggesting that the city of Columbus is not ready, but yet the federal government ranks them in the top 5 cities in the country that's most prepared and most equipped to handle a terrorist attack. How do you explain that?
Candace, that's simply not true. What you're citing to is a question of interoperability in communications, and yes, we do have a very good interoperability communication structure in Central Ohio, thanks to some other federal grants that were in effect effectively obtained from other sources. The reality is that we did not score well on our national preparedness scorecard this year. The mayor's got that scorecard, and if you want the truth, you ask the mayor to give you that scorecard, and you will see just where we rank on that scorecard. That is something that he is perfectly free to give you. He has not released to the press because he doesn't want you to see the truth.
The mayor works with other surrounding area law enforcement responders to get this money, saying that, you know, they don't know what they need or what they're asking for.
Candace, when you look at not only these preparedness grants which were issued today, but also the firefighter grants, which is a separate category of grants which Columbus has also done a very poor job in trying to secure, what you see is each subdivision is capable of applying for its own funds, and in fact that happens. Any governmental subdivision can. But what we're saying here is when you look at the Columbus city and you look at the size of the city, we're receiving about $4.7 million out of $747 million that was allocated today. So a very small percentage of the total funds were allocated by Homeland Security today. An insufficient amount of funds for the needs in this community, and they're demonstrated needs. We know from, for example, a series of articles in the Dispatch of the deficiencies in our police cruisers and our fire trucks here in this city. those deficiencies could have in part been addressed had there been an appropriate attention given to this grant-making process and enough time and attention made to try to secure additional funds. The firefighter grants, which were not announced today, are another area that are subject to being awarded on a municipality by municipality basis. I don't believe Columbus has received any funds in that grant area in the last couple of years, despite the fact we know that over half the fire fleet is more than 10 years old.
Senator Brown would disagree with you and say that Columbus, and they have applied properly for all those grants. How do you refute that?
I think what we need to do is look at the formula for grant making and look simply at the numbers. What we know is that Columbus is ranked 18th in the national terror assessment in terms of terror factors. We also know that we're the 15th largest city in the country. Those are the two factors which weigh the most heavily in the grant-making process. It's inexplicable with a city that large, with that high a terror rating, that we would rank 40 out of 45 in terms of the absolute rankings of the cities.
So what do you recommend that the mayor do? What's the solution? What would be your solution?
Candace, I think that the solution is a very simple one. And it is a recognition that in perhaps the most important function that city government has, which is keeping its residents safe, that a high level of attention, a high level of focus needs to be placed on having strategic plans for being prepared to meet the ever-changing public safety needs in a community like this. What we need to do is think about not just what is going to happen today or what's going to happen tomorrow, but what are the needs going to be in 2 years, in 4 years, in 6 years, in 8 years, in 10 years, and evolve a plan that meets those needs on an ongoing basis. And I don't believe the city of Columbus has done any such thing in the last 8 years.
If you weren't running for mayor, would you be standing out here making these same accusations? Would you be calling up City Hall demanding something be done?
Absolutely. I was appalled when I learned that we rated so low last year as well. And this is not a one-year phenomenon, by the way, on the grant-making process. The last several years, ever since Homeland Security has gone to a competitive grant-making process, we have slipped further and further down the list. Before, and this is another good illustration of your point, Candace, about competition and do we deserve more money or not. Before there was a competitive grant-making process, Columbus was receiving almost twice the amount of money that it's getting today in the grant-making process. We're failing in this competition, and it's not just a competition for show, it's a competition for the basic security of the citizens of the city.
Do you think President Bush has dedicated enough money to Homeland Security?
Bob, very good question. Have we dedicated enough money to Homeland Security? I think that the total monies, $17 billion, which reflects the federal share alone of what has to be a state, local, and federal partnership on Homeland Security, the answer is probably yes. I don't think you're going to hear many people in the Congress, either from the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, say that we are not adequately funding Homeland Security overall. What we're saying here today, under these circumstances in Columbus, that we need to be more cognizant of the threats that are present here in this community. We are ranked fairly highly on the threat index. We are one of the largest cities in the country, and nevertheless we have fallen to the bottom of the pile of metropolitan areas in terms of actually securing the grant money. Now, since this is a competitive process, and we've provided you some remarks from Secretary Chertoff from November of last fall, when he indicated that the grant materials were going to be issued to the states and city governments in December and allowed for an integrated give and take process. In other words, the cities could come back and say, we need more, and so on. I suspect that what's happened here is we simply did not engage in that process in a way that was persuasive enough to get a larger share of the federal dollars for Columbus. Columbus needs the money. There's no question that we need to find sources to pay for police cars, for training of police officers, for fire trucks, for the training of our fire service. We need those dollars, and that's one of the places to look. When the money's there and is subject to allocation in a competitive grant-making process, we've got to do everything we can to be as competitive as possible.
Congresswoman Price issued a press release today announcing this funding. It's a different take on it than you do.
Could very well be.
Do you think the congressional delegation should do more too, or should they
congressional delegation would have a secondary role in this process. This process is a direct state, local, federal, by design process, and it does not include the congressional delegations. And in fact, up until the very last minute here, in the last week or two, when some of the preliminary allocation numbers were announced about a week or so ago to the leaders in Congress, the process was very much kept out of the congressional delegations' hands. And the reason for that is quite simple. They wanted a valid partnership between state and federal, state government, local government, and the agency, Homeland Security, without political influence involved. Now, I think you've probably seen in the last week or two that some of the congressional delegations have agitated for additional money, for example, New York and California. But the reality is they were not included in that process until the very end, after the preliminary allocations were already completed.
Several weeks ago, or months ago, you had talked to challenged Mayor Coleman to a debate on public safety specific issues. Has there been any response to that?
We've not gotten any response to that at all, Sam. I think it's a very important set of issues. It's a set of issues that is highlighted again by the coincidence here of two things. One is this national intelligence estimate, which, by the way, was a consensus national intelligence estimate yesterday that indicated we're going to have a persistent and evolving threat to domestic security from Muslim fundamentalist groups and principally the Al-Qaeda forces. That's important, and the lack of preparedness demonstrated here by city government, I think, ties right into that intelligence estimate.
How could the city be better in having minority recruits and women coming into the force? What can Columbus do that isn't good?
Well, I'll give you a little taste of one of the things I think they can do, and we have been working with our state legislature, and we expect here in the next week or two to be able to announce the introduction of legislation in Ohio that will create a tuition reimbursement program to permit police, young men and women who wish to become police and firemen, to receive college tuition reimbursement in exchange for a pledge of years of service in public safety forces. And I think that's the kind of innovative thinking we need to be able to recruit adequately here in Ohio, particularly minorities. I mean, the type of bright men and women that we need, whether they're minority or whatever population they're from, are competed for from a lot of different jobs, whether it's private sector jobs, public sector jobs, the Army, the National Guard, and so on. We need to be more creative in the ways that we attract and hold those people. You know, we're also competing, frankly, against folks from other cities and other states who would like to have our experienced police officers leave here and go to, whether it's Glendale, Arizona, or Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So we've got to be cognizant of that as well. To keep young men and women in Ohio in safety forces is the same dilemma we face in almost every other area of our economy. We need to be more creative, and we have to come up with better ideas to keep them here and interested in helping us turn Ohio around.
Nice job, Bill.
Thank you, Sam.